I feel like a bird in a golden cage. The words echo through the silent halls of a Manhattan apartment building like a ghost's whisper, prophetic and haunting. June 28, 2008. Water Street, Financial District, New York City. In the span of seconds that separate life from death, Ruslana Korshunova falls 9 stories from her luxury apartment window to the pavement below. She is 20 years old, at the height of her career as one of the world's most sought-after supermodels, with her ethereal beauty gracing the covers of Vogue, Elle, and Harper's Bazaar. But the golden-haired girl who captivated the fashion world with her fairy tale beauty has become the center of one of modeling's most enduring mysteries. The police rule it suicide. Her family insists it was accident. Her friends whisper about something darker. Conspiracy theories involving spiritual cults, powerful men, and secrets that died with her on that summer morning in Manhattan. The woman who once wrote, "Sometimes the mirror shows a stranger, not me," has become a stranger to everyone who thought they knew her. The Rapunzel of Almaty, discovered at 15 for her cascading golden hair and doll-like features, has fallen from her tower in the most literal and devastating way possible. But unlike the fairy tale that made her famous, there is no prince to catch her, no happy ending to redeem the tragedy. This is not just the story of a model who died too young. It's the story of a dream that became a nightmare, of beauty that became a burden, of fame that became a prison with golden bars. Ruslana Korshunova represents everything magnificent and terrible about the fashion industry's promise of transformation. The possibility that a girl from Kazakhstan could become a global icon, and the price that such transformation can demand. The investigation will close within weeks, filed away as another tragic suicide in a city full of broken dreams. But the questions linger like shadows in the corners of every photograph she ever posed for. Was Ruslana's death the result of depression, accident, or something more sinister? Did the bird in the golden cage choose to fly away, or was she pushed from her perch by forces too powerful to resist? To understand how Ruslana Korshunova became both a fairy tale princess and a noir tragedy, we must journey back to where it all began, to the snow-covered steppes of Kazakhstan, where a little girl first learned that beauty could be both blessing and curse, that mirrors could lie as easily as they could reveal truth, and that sometimes the most dangerous cages are the ones lined with gold. March 2, 1987. Almaty, Kazakhstan. In a Soviet-era apartment building where concrete walls hold dreams as tightly as they trap heat, Ruslana Korshunova enters the world as the daughter of Valentina, a university economics professor, and Ruslan, an engineer who dreams of better days ahead. The Kazakhstan of Ruslana's childhood exists in the twilight of the Soviet Empire, a place where Western influences seep through the cracks of communist ideology like water through ice. From her earliest days, Ruslana possesses an otherworldly quality that makes strangers stop and stare. Her hair grows like spun gold, reaching her waist by the time she can walk, earning her the nickname Rapunzel from neighbors who see something fairy tale-like in her delicate features. But in a world where standing out can be dangerous, beauty becomes both gift and burden for a child trying to navigate the complexities of post-Soviet life. Her mother Valentina recognizes something special in her daughter, but struggles with how to nurture it. In Soviet Kazakhstan, individual beauty is less important than collective achievement. Yet Valentina cannot ignore the way people react to Ruslana, the way conversations stop when she enters a room, the way photographers at family gatherings focus their cameras on her face rather than the group. It's as if Ruslana carries some internal light that makes everything around her seem dimmer by comparison. The collapse of the Soviet Union when Ruslana is 4 years old transforms Kazakhstan into a place of opportunity and uncertainty. Western culture floods in through television shows, magazines, and movies that show a world where beauty can be currency, where young women like Ruslana might find paths to success that previous generations never imagined. But this new world also brings new pressures, new standards of perfection that seem designed for girls who look exactly like Ruslana. Her childhood unfolds in the shadow of this cultural transformation. While other children play traditional games, Ruslana finds herself drawn to mirrors, studying her reflection with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. She practices poses she sees in the few Western magazines that make their way to Almaty, learning to tilt her head to catch light, to make her eyes seem larger and more mysterious. These early experiments with image creation feel like play, but they're actually her first lessons in the performance of beauty. The household dynamics shift around Ruslana's unusual appearance in ways that both protect and isolate her. Valentina becomes fiercely protective of her daughter's innocence, understanding instinctively that beauty this extraordinary attracts attention that could be dangerous in their changing world. She limits Ruslana's interactions with strangers, carefully monitors who takes photographs of her daughter, and tries to shield her from the kind of exploitation that often befalls beautiful children in unstable societies. But this protection comes at a cost. Ruslana grows up with a heightened awareness of her own appearance that borders on the obsessive. She learns to see herself as others see her, as an object of beauty rather than a complete human being. The constant attention to her looks, even when well-intentioned, teaches her that her value lies primarily in her appearance rather than her intelligence, personality, or character. Her father, Ruslan, struggles with different concerns about his daughter's beauty. As an engineer trained in Soviet practicality, he worries that Ruslana's focus on appearance will distract her from developing the intellectual skills necessary for success in the modern world. He encourages her academic pursuits, particularly her talent for languages, hoping to provide her with alternatives to a life based solely on looks. The tension between her parents' different approaches to her gifts creates internal conflict for Ruslana. She wants to please both parents, to be the practical, intelligent daughter her father envisions, and the protected, cherished beauty her mother tries to preserve. This early experience of trying to be different things to different people establishes a pattern that will later define her professional relationships and personal struggles. School becomes a complicated environment for someone whose appearance generates so much attention. Teachers praise her academic work. She shows particular aptitude for languages, dreaming of becoming a translator who could bridge different worlds through words. But her classmates' reactions to her beauty range from admiration to jealousy to something approaching fear, as if Ruslana's unusual looks mark her as fundamentally different from everyone else. The social dynamics of adolescence prove particularly challenging for someone who stands out so dramatically. Boys become tongue-tied in her presence, while girls often view her as competition or threat even when she shows no interest in the romantic dramas that consume her peers. Ruslana finds herself socially isolated not by choice but by circumstance, learning early that extraordinary beauty can be as isolating as extraordinary ugliness. Her academic performance remains excellent throughout these socially difficult years, providing her with a sense of accomplishment that exists separate from her appearance. She excels particularly in foreign language studies, dreaming of a future where she could work as an interpreter or translator for international organizations. These dreams represent her desire to be valued for her mind rather than her face, to build a career based on skill rather than genetics. The isolation that comes with being perceived as special begins early and cuts deep. Ruslana develops the habit of writing in journals, filling notebooks with observations about the world around her and her place within it. Her early entries reveal a child who is acutely aware of her effect on others, but uncertain about what that effect means or how to control it. "People look at me like I'm not real," she writes at age 12. "Sometimes I feel not real too." These journal entries become her most authentic form of self-expression, the place where she can explore thoughts and feelings that she cannot share with anyone else. The notebooks fill with poetry, observations about human nature, and increasingly sophisticated analyses of the way beauty functions in society. Even as a teenager, Ruslana shows remarkable insight into the psychology of attraction and the social dynamics of appearance. The economic changes sweeping Kazakhstan during Ruslana's adolescence create new opportunities but also new pressures for families like the Korshunovas. The collapse of Soviet-era job security forces many people to look for alternative sources of income, and Ruslana's beauty begins to seem like a potential economic asset rather than just a personal gift. The family receives increasing pressure from neighbors and extended family members to do something with Ruslana's looks, to find ways to monetize her appearance for the family's benefit. The discovery of her potential as a model happens almost by accident. A photographer from a local newspaper assigned to cover a school cultural festival becomes transfixed by Ruslana's face in his viewfinder. The resulting photograph, Ruslana in traditional Kazakh dress, her golden hair braided with ribbons, her eyes reflecting both innocence and something deeper, appears on the front page with a caption calling her Rapunzel of Almaty. The image travels beyond Kazakhstan's borders, through newly established internet connections, eventually reaching modeling scouts in Moscow and beyond. Within months, agents are calling the Korshunova family with offers that seem too good to be true. Contracts that promise to transform their beautiful daughter into an international success story, to take her places that exist only in the magazines she studies so intensely. Could these early experiences with being objectified and commodified have planted the seeds of the psychological struggles that would later consume her? In a world where her worth was measured primarily by her appearance, where her intellect and personality became secondary to her photogenic qualities, was Ruslana destined to lose herself in the very beauty that made her famous? The decision to pursue modeling professionally forces the family to confront the gap between their modest circumstances and the glamorous world that Ruslana's beauty might unlock. The contracts being offered require travel to Moscow, then to Western Europe and possibly America. Journeys that represent not just geographic displacement but complete cultural transformation for a girl who has never lived outside Kazakhstan. But perhaps most significantly, these early modeling experiences teach Ruslana that her value is conditional, dependent on maintaining the very qualities that she cannot control. Her hair must remain long and golden. Her face must stay eternally youthful. Her body must conform to ever-changing standards of perfection. The child who once played at posing in mirrors now faces the possibility that posing might become her life's work, that performance might replace authentic self-expression as her primary mode of existence. 15-year-old Ruslana Korshunova stands in a Moscow modeling agency, her floor-length golden hair catching the studio lights like captured sunlight. The newspaper clipping that started everything, Rapunzel of Almaty, has opened doors that once seemed permanently closed to girls from Kazakhstan. But as she faces her first professional photo shoot, Ruslana begins to understand that fairy tales and reality operate according to very different rules. The Moscow modeling scene introduces her to a world where beauty is both worshipped and dissected with clinical precision. Agents measure her proportions with the detachment of scientists. Photographers study her face through camera lenses as if examining specimens under microscopes. The girl who once found magic in mirrors now discovers that mirrors can be cruel judges, reflecting back imperfections that she never noticed, revealing flaws that need correction before she can achieve the perfection that success demands. The transformation from amateur to professional model requires learning an entirely new vocabulary of self-presentation. Ruslana must master the subtle differences between editorial poses and commercial shots, between high-fashion attitudes and commercial accessibility. She studies fashion magazines with the intensity of a scholar, analyzing how successful models position their bodies where they direct their gaze, how they convey emotion through posture and expression. Her first professional photographs capture something extraordinary, a quality that transcends mere physical beauty and touches something deeper, more mysterious. Ruslana possesses what photographers call the look, an indefinable combination of innocence and knowledge, vulnerability and strength, accessibility and mystery that makes viewers unable to look away. The camera loves her in ways that feel almost supernatural, as if the technology itself recognizes something special in her face. But the technical aspects of professional modeling prove more challenging than anyone anticipated. The long hours under hot studio lights test her physical endurance in ways that nothing in her previous life prepared her for. The constant changes of clothing, makeup, and hairstyling required for different shots create a strange sense of identity fluidity. She becomes accustomed to seeing different versions of herself emerge from the collaborative efforts of stylists, photographers, and makeup artists. The psychological adjustment to professional modeling proves even more difficult than the physical demands. Ruslana must learn to disconnect emotionally from the images being created, to become a kind of living mannequin who can embody different fantasies without losing her sense of self in the process. The skill proves essential for professional success, but gradually erodes her ability to maintain authentic emotional connections in her personal life. But success in Moscow comes with unexpected costs. The cultural gap between her Kazakh upbringing and the cosmopolitan modeling world creates constant tension. Ruslana must learn new ways of speaking, moving, and presenting herself that feel artificial, as if she's constantly performing a role rather than being herself. The linguistic skills that once made her dream of becoming a translator now serve a different purpose, helping her navigate conversations in Russian, English, and emerging fragments of other European languages. The economic realities of the modeling world introduce Ruslana to concepts of value and commodity that complicate her understanding of her own worth. She learns that her appearance has literal monetary value that fluctuates based on market demand, seasonal trends, and the mysterious preferences of photographers and designers. The discovery that her face can be bought and sold like any other product creates psychological distance between her physical self and her sense of personal identity. The loneliness is profound and unexpected. Surrounded by people who want to work with her, photograph her, and profit from her beauty, Ruslana finds herself more isolated than she ever was in Almaty. The modeling world operates according to its own social rules, where relationships are often transactional, where friendship and professional opportunity become indistinguishable from each other. The other models she meets become both companions and competitors in this strange new world. Many are also young women from Eastern Europe seeking transformation through beauty, carrying their own stories of displacement and reinvention. The shared experience creates bonds of understanding, but the constant competition for bookings and opportunities prevents these relationships from developing into genuine friendships. Her journal entries from this period reveal a young woman struggling to maintain her sense of self in an environment that values her primarily as a beautiful object. "I am like a painting that everyone wants to own, but no one wants to talk to," she writes. "They see my face but not my thoughts, my body but not my heart." The words reveal someone who is beginning to understand the difference between being seen and being known, between being desired and being loved. The pressure to maintain her fairy tale image becomes increasingly demanding as her career gains momentum. Her hair, which made her famous, requires constant care and attention. Any change in her appearance, weight gain, a different hairstyle, even the natural process of aging, could threaten the very qualities that make her marketable. Ruslana begins to understand that her beauty is not just a gift, but a responsibility, something that must be protected and preserved at all costs. The beauty regimen required to maintain her professional image becomes a full-time occupation in itself. Daily workouts to maintain her figure, elaborate skincare routines to preserve her complexion, careful attention to nutrition to keep her energy levels high enough for the demanding schedule of shoots and fittings. The maintenance of beauty, she discovers, requires enormous amounts of time, money, and mental energy that leave little room for other pursuits. The move to international markets happens faster than anyone expects. Scouts from major modeling agencies in Paris, Milan, and New York begin competing for the right to represent the Rapunzel girl. Recognizing that her unique look could translate into massive commercial success on a global scale. The offers become increasingly lucrative and impossible to refuse, promising transformations that extend far beyond anything Ruslana ever imagined for herself. But with each new opportunity comes greater distance from her authentic self. The languages she speaks begin to shift from Kazakh and Russian to the international pidgin of the fashion world, a mixture of English, French, and Italian phrases that prioritize commerce over genuine communication. Her thoughts, once recorded carefully in journals, become fragmented and scattered as the demands of her career consume more of her mental energy. The relationship with her family becomes complicated by geography and growing cultural differences. Phone calls home to Almaty feel increasingly surreal as Ruslana tries to explain a world that her parents cannot fully comprehend. How do you describe the experience of being photographed by famous artists for magazines that circulate globally when your mother still struggles to understand why anyone would pay such enormous sums of money for pictures of their daughter? Was this rapid transformation from Kazakh teenager to international commodity a dream come true? Or the beginning of a slow-motion tragedy? The girl who once wrote about feeling not real in her school journal now faces the ultimate test of authenticity, maintaining her sense of self while becoming a fantasy for millions of strangers who will never know anything about her beyond what they see in photographs. The success brings material rewards that her family could never have imagined. Money, travel, access to worlds of luxury and sophistication that exist far beyond the reach of most people from Kazakhstan. But it also creates new forms of pressure and expectation that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. Ruslana must learn to be simultaneously accessible and mysterious, innocent and sophisticated, relatable and otherworldly. The journal entries become less frequent as her schedule intensifies, but when she does write, the words reveal someone who is beginning to lose track of where Ruslana ends and Rapunzel begins. The performance of beauty that once felt like play now feels like work, and the work never ends. 2004-2006. The leap from regional success to international stardom happens with the velocity of light and the inevitability of gravity. At 17, Ruslana Korshunova steps off a plane at JFK Airport carrying a single suitcase and a modeling contract that will transform her from a girl from Kazakhstan into one of the most recognizable faces in global fashion. New York City spreads before her like a glittering promise, but also like a labyrinth where young women lose themselves in pursuit of dreams that may be impossible to achieve. The Manhattan modeling scene of the mid-2000s operates like a beautiful machine designed to manufacture fantasy. Ruslana enters this world at the perfect moment. Her ethereal, fairy tale beauty aligns perfectly with fashion's growing fascination with romantic, otherworldly aesthetics. Designers like Marc Jacobs and Nicolas Ghesquière see in her face the perfect canvas for their artistic visions, while photographers recognize something almost supernatural in the way light behaves around her. Her first major breakthrough comes with a Dior campaign that positions her as the modern incarnation of classical beauty. The photographs, shot by renowned photographer Steven Meisel, capture Ruslana in flowing gowns that echo the romantic paintings of the pre-Raphaelites. Her hair, now waist-length and more golden than ever, becomes the focal point of images that feel more like fine art than commercial photography. The campaign establishes her as the new face of romantic femininity, a title that brings enormous professional opportunities but also creates impossible expectations for her personal life. The creation of these iconic images requires technical precision that pushes Ruslana's modeling skills to new levels. Each shot demands hours of preparation, elaborate hairstyling that takes teams of professionals to achieve, makeup that must appear natural while being completely artificial, costumes that require careful fitting and adjustment between every take. The process teaches her that the seemingly effortless beauty captured in final images represents enormous amounts of collaborative work and technical expertise. The artistic direction for the Dior campaign specifically references classical paintings and mythology, positioning Ruslana as a modern-day goddess or fairy tale princess. The creative team studies pre-Raphaelite paintings for inspiration, recreating the flowing hair, ethereal expressions, and romantic poses that define 19th-century ideals of feminine beauty. Ruslana becomes a living bridge between historical artistic traditions and contemporary commercial photography. But the mythological positioning creates psychological pressure that extends far beyond the professional realm. Ruslana begins to understand that she's being marketed not just as a model, but as a fantasy, a representation of impossible perfection that exists more in imagination than reality. The gap between her actual personality and the mythological character she's supposed to embody becomes a source of constant internal tension. The Vogue covers follow in rapid succession. American Vogue, British Vogue, Vogue Paris, each one cementing her status as fashion's newest obsession. Anna Wintour herself declares Ruslana the face of the future, a pronouncement that feels like both blessing and curse. The girl who once dreamed of being a translator now finds herself translating emotions and fantasies through facial expressions, becoming fluent in the visual language of desire and aspiration. Each Vogue cover requires a different interpretation of her beauty, demonstrating her range as a visual performer. For American Vogue, she embodies accessible glamour that speaks to mainstream audiences. For British Vogue, she channels avant-garde sophistication that appeals to fashion insiders. For Vogue Paris, she becomes high-art ethereal beauty that transcends commercial considerations. The versatility establishes her as more than just a pretty face. She's a chameleon capable of embodying different cultural ideals of beauty. The process of creating these covers also reveals the extent to which contemporary beauty is manufactured rather than natural. Teams of specialists work for hours to achieve images that appear effortless. Lighting technicians who create the perfect glow, makeup artists who sculpt her features to match current aesthetic trends, photo retouchers who perfect every detail in post-production. Ruslana learns that the beauty audiences see in magazines bears only passing resemblance to how anyone actually looks in real life. But success at this level requires sacrifices that become apparent only gradually. The constant travel, Paris for Fashion Week, Milan for campaigns, Tokyo for editorial shoots, creates a life of perpetual displacement where home becomes whatever luxury hotel or model apartment she's assigned for the week. Ruslana begins to understand that international modeling success requires becoming a citizen of everywhere and nowhere, belonging fully to no single place or culture. The jet lag and constant schedule changes wreak havoc on her physical and mental health in ways that the glamorous exterior never reveals. Sleep becomes irregular, meals are often skipped or rushed between appointments, and the constant pressure to look perfect while feeling exhausted creates a kind of chronic low-level stress that gradually erodes her sense of well-being. The pressure to maintain her image intensifies with each new booking. Her hair, which made her famous, becomes both her greatest asset and her greatest burden. Stylists guard it jealously, subjecting it to treatments and manipulations that maintain its fairy tale perfection while gradually damaging its natural health. Ruslana begins to feel like Samson in reverse. Her strength lies in her hair, but that same hair has become a chain that binds her to an identity she didn't choose. The physical maintenance required for her career becomes increasingly invasive and time-consuming. Professional colorists work to maintain the exact shade of gold that made her famous. Hair extensions are added and removed for different shoots, requiring hours of careful application and causing gradual damage to her natural hair. The very feature that made her career possible becomes a source of constant anxiety and physical discomfort. The relationships she forms in the modeling world feel simultaneously intimate and hollow. She bonds with other models who understand the unique pressures of their profession. But these friendships exist within the context of constant competition for the same job, the same magazine covers, the same designer preferences. The support system that should help her navigate her new life becomes another source of stress and uncertainty. The Fashion Week circuit creates a particularly intense social environment where models, designers, photographers, and editors intersect in highly charged professional and social situations. Ruslana must navigate these events as both participant and product, networking for future opportunities while also serving as a living advertisement for her current bookings. The social skills required prove as demanding as the professional modeling skills, requiring constant attention to appearances and relationships. Her romantic life becomes particularly complicated as her fame grows. The men who approach her are often attracted more to her public image than to her private personality, seeking relationships with Ruslana the supermodel rather than Ruslana the person. She begins to question whether genuine connection is possible when everyone knows her face but few people know her thoughts, when her beauty precedes her into every room and colors every interaction. The dating process becomes fraught with uncertainty about motivations and intentions. Is someone interested in her as a person, or as a trophy to be displayed? Are romantic gestures genuine expressions of affection, or calculated attempts to gain access to her professional network? The questions become impossible to answer definitively, creating a general atmosphere of suspicion and guardedness in her personal relationships. The financial success provides independence, but also creates new anxieties. The apartment on Water Street in Manhattan's financial district represents the culmination of her professional achievements. A luxury space with views of the harbor where she can finally create a private sanctuary. But the apartment also becomes a beautiful prison, a place where she can escape public attention only by isolating herself from all human connection. Her journal entries from this period reveal someone struggling with the disconnect between external success and internal fulfillment. "Everyone thinks my life is perfect because my pictures are beautiful," she writes. "But pictures are not life, and beautiful is not the same as happy." The words capture the fundamental paradox of her existence, achieving everything she was supposed to want while discovering that achievement cannot fill the emotional void that fame has created. Behind all that glamour was there an unbearable loneliness that no amount of professional success could fill. The woman who graced magazine covers that millions of people bought and treasured found herself unable to trust that anyone loved her, for reasons that had nothing to do with her appearance. The fairy tale princess had found her castle, but the castle was empty of everything except mirrors. The pressure to maintain perfection becomes psychologically exhausting. Every public appearance requires careful preparation. Every photograph must meet impossible standards. Every interview must present the right combination of accessibility and mystery. Ruslana begins to feel like she's constantly performing, even in private moments, as if she's forgotten how to exist without an audience. The success also brings unwanted attention from people whose intentions are unclear. Wealthy men begin pursuing her with offers that blur the lines between romantic interest and business propositions. The modeling world's lack of clear boundaries between professional and personal relationships creates situations where Ruslana must constantly assess whether people are interested in her as a person or as a commodity they might acquire. 2006-2008. The final chapter of Ruslana Korshunova's life unfolds like a noir film where the ending feels both inevitable and inexplicable. At the height of her fame, with magazine covers and luxury campaigns cementing her status as one of modeling's most sought-after faces, she begins to withdraw from the public eye in ways that her friends and colleagues find increasingly concerning. The fairy tale princess starts showing cracks in her perfect facade, revealing glimpses of darkness that no amount of professional success can illuminate. The blog entries she posts during this period provide the most direct insight into her psychological state, offering fragments of her inner life that contrast sharply with her public image. "I'm so lost. Will love ever find me?" she writes, the words appearing on her screen like a message in a bottle thrown into the digital ocean. The question haunts everyone who reads it, not just for its sadness but for its fundamental confusion about whether love is something that finds you or something you must actively seek. The blog becomes her most authentic form of communication, the place where she can express thoughts and feelings that have no place in the carefully constructed world of fashion and modeling. The entries reveal someone who is struggling not just with loneliness but with profound questions about identity, purpose, and meaning that success has failed to answer. The girl who once filled journals with poetry and observations now uses the internet as her confessional, reaching out to strangers for the connection she cannot find in her professional or personal relationships. The contrast between her blog voice and her public persona becomes increasingly stark as her psychological state deteriorates. In interviews, she continues to present herself as grateful, professional, and optimistic about her career. In her blog, she writes about feeling like a ghost in my own life, about watching herself perform the role of successful model while feeling completely disconnected from the experience. Her behavior becomes increasingly erratic in ways that alarm those closest to her. Friends report that she seems distracted during conversations, as if part of her attention is always focused elsewhere, on some internal dialogue that she cannot share. The girl who once charmed photographers with her natural warmth begins to seem distant and unreachable, present in body but absent in spirit. The professional demands continue despite her deteriorating mental state, creating a vicious cycle where the pressures that are causing her problems also prevent her from addressing them. Every day brings new photo shoots, fittings, meetings, and social obligations that require her to maintain the facade of success and happiness. The schedule leaves no time for rest, reflection, or recovery, intensifying the psychological pressure that is already overwhelming her. The involvement with the spiritual group Rose of the World introduces new complications into Ruslana's already fragmented existence. The organization, which promises to help members discover their true spiritual identity, appeals to her search for meaning beyond the superficial world of fashion and fame. But friends worry that the group's intensive workshops and psychological techniques are destabilizing rather than healing, creating new anxieties rather than resolving existing ones. The discovery of Rose of the World happens through another model who claims the group helped her overcome similar feelings of emptiness and disconnection. The testimonial appeals to Ruslana because it comes from someone who understands the unique pressures of their shared profession. Someone who has experienced the same sense of being valued for appearance rather than essence. The initial sessions with Rose of the World feel revelatory to Ruslana, offering explanations for her psychological struggles that no one in her professional world has been able to provide. The group's teachings suggest that her feelings of disconnection and emptiness are spiritual rather than psychological problems, requiring spiritual rather than therapeutic solutions. The framework appeals to someone who has exhausted conventional approaches to finding meaning and connection. The sessions with Rose of the World involve what members call emotional archaeology, intensive psychological exercises designed to uncover repressed memories and unlock hidden potential. For someone like Ruslana, whose entire career depends on maintaining a carefully constructed public image, these exercises create dangerous conflicts between her need for privacy and the group's demand for complete emotional transparency. The group's philosophy emphasizes the illusory nature of material success and the importance of discovering one's true spiritual self beyond earthly attachments. For Ruslana, whose entire identity has become intertwined with her career success, these teachings create profound cognitive dissonance. The achievements that others see as validation of her worth are reframed as obstacles to spiritual growth, creating guilt and confusion about everything she has worked to accomplish. The intensive workshops required by Rose of the World become increasingly frequent and demanding as Ruslana's involvement deepens. The sessions often last for entire weekends, requiring her to cancel professional commitments and social obligations. The isolation from her normal support systems, limited as they were, intensifies her dependence on the group for emotional validation and spiritual guidance. Her journal entries become increasingly fragmented and difficult to understand, filled with references to breaking free and finding the real me that suggests someone in the midst of a psychological crisis rather than spiritual awakening. "Sometimes the mirror shows a stranger, not me," she writes, echoing themes that have haunted her since childhood but with new urgency and desperation. The language she uses in these entries borrows heavily from Rose of the World terminology, suggesting that the group's vocabulary is replacing her natural way of expressing herself. Concepts like spiritual awakening, false consciousness, and transcendence through surrender begin appearing in her writing, but they feel imposed rather than organic, as if she's trying to convince herself of beliefs that don't quite fit her actual experience. The pressure from the spiritual group coincides with growing stress in her professional life. The modeling industry, always hungry for new faces, begins showing interest in younger models whose fresh appearances make Ruslana, at 20, seem almost veteran by comparison. The realization that her career might have already peaked while she's barely out of her teens creates existential panic about what her life might become when her beauty inevitably fades. The cruel mathematics of the modeling industry become increasingly apparent as Ruslana observes newer models receiving the bookings and opportunities that once came automatically to her. The fashion world's appetite for novelty means that even successful models have limited windows of peak earning potential, usually measured in years rather than decades. The pressure to maximize income while her marketability remains high creates stress that compounds her existing psychological struggles. The financial pressures, despite her success, become more complex as her lifestyle expands to match her income. The Water Street apartment, while beautiful, comes with enormous monthly expenses. The constant travel required for her career creates costs that eat into her earnings. The pressure to maintain her appearance, expensive treatments, designer clothes, professional grooming, requires enormous ongoing investment in preserving the very qualities that make her marketable. Her relationship with her family becomes increasingly strained as the distance between her life in Manhattan and theirs in Kazakhstan grows beyond mere geography. Phone calls home become difficult exercises in translation, not just between languages but between entirely different ways of understanding reality. How do you explain to your mother that you feel trapped by the very success she sacrificed to help you achieve? The romantic relationships that develop during this period carry the weight of her growing desperation for authentic connection. The men who pursue her are often attracted to her fame and beauty, but Ruslana yearns for someone who can see past her public image to whatever remains of her private self. The search for love becomes entangled with her search for identity, creating relationships that carry impossible expectations for emotional rescue and psychological completion. The final blog entries take on an increasingly apocalyptic tone, filled with references to birds and cages that suggest someone who feels fundamentally trapped by circumstances she cannot control. "I feel like a bird in a golden cage," she writes, the metaphor capturing both the luxury of her lifestyle and the imprisonment it represents. The image becomes prophetic in ways that no one who reads it can anticipate. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? For Ruslana, the question becomes academic as her psychological state deteriorates rapidly in the weeks leading up to her death. The woman who once seemed to embody fairy tale perfection begins showing signs of someone who has lost the ability to distinguish between fantasy and reality, between performance and authentic existence. The Rose of the World sessions become more intensive as Ruslana's spiritual searching becomes more desperate. Friends report that she speaks increasingly about transformation and breaking free from illusion in ways that suggest someone preparing for dramatic change rather than gradual growth. The group's emphasis on abandoning earthly attachments and discovering one's true spiritual nature appeals to someone who has grown tired of being valued primarily for her physical appearance. The final weeks of her life are marked by behavior that friends later describe as simultaneously more authentic and more frightening than anything they had witnessed before. Ruslana seems to be shedding the careful persona that has defined her professional life, revealing raw emotions and unfiltered thoughts that suggest someone who has decided to stop performing and start living, or stop living altogether. June 28, 2008. The morning breaks clear and bright over Manhattan, the kind of summer day that makes the city feel full of infinite possibility. In her apartment on Water Street, Ruslana Korshunova wakes to a view of New York Harbor that encompasses both the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, symbols of freedom and new beginnings that have welcomed millions of immigrants to American shores. But for the girl who came to New York as her own kind of immigrant, seeking transformation through beauty rather than opportunity through work, the view offers no comfort. The final hours unfold with a terrible ordinariness that makes the tragedy feel even more inexplicable. Ruslana goes through her morning routine, showering, applying the skincare treatments that maintain her famous complexion, choosing clothes from a wardrobe that represents every major fashion house in the world. To any observer, she appears to be preparing for another day in the life of a successful international model. But the preparation takes on ritual significance that suggests someone saying goodbye rather than getting ready. She spends extra time arranging objects in her apartment, placing photographs and mementos in configurations that feel deliberate, as if creating a final still life that will tell her story to whoever discovers it. The care with which she handles these objects suggests someone who understands their symbolic importance to the narrative that will follow. The call to her mother in Kazakhstan becomes the last conversation between them, a brief exchange in their native language that provides no warning of what is to come. Valentina later recalls that Ruslana sounded tired but not desperate, homesick but not suicidal. The conversation ends with expressions of love and promises to talk again soon, promises that will never be fulfilled. The final blog entry appears online within hours of her death, posted either as a last message or a final cry for help that arrives too late to matter. "I'm a bird in a cage, I need to fly," she writes. The words taking on devastating significance in light of what follows. The metaphor that has haunted her writing for months becomes literal in the most tragic way possible. At approximately 2:30 p.m., Ruslana Korshunova falls 9 stories from the window of her Manhattan apartment to the pavement below. The impact kills her instantly, transforming the fairy tale princess into a crime scene, the bird in the golden cage into a mystery that will puzzle investigators and haunt the fashion world for years to come. The scene that greets first responders offers few clues about intention or accident. The window from which she fell shows no signs of struggle. Her apartment contains no suicide note, no evidence of depression so severe that it would drive someone to such desperate action. The physical evidence suggests either a tragic accident or a determined gust, but provides no definitive answer about which interpretation is correct. The investigation that follows unfolds with procedural thoroughness, but arrives at conclusions that satisfy no one completely. Detective Michael Romano, a 20-year veteran of the NYPD who has seen his share of celebrity tragedies, approaches the case with the methodical precision that such high-profile deaths demand. The scene offers few clues about intention or accident. The window from which Ruslana fell shows no signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry, no indication that anyone else was present in the apartment at the time of her death. The autopsy results, when they finally arrive, provide clinical answers but no emotional resolution. Dr. Sarah Chen, the medical examiner assigned to the case, finds no evidence of drugs or alcohol in Ruslana's system, no signs of physical trauma that would suggest foul play, no indication of the kind of severe depression that typically precedes suicide attempts. The physical evidence suggests either a tragic accident or a determined suicide, but provides no definitive answer about which interpretation is correct. The apartment itself becomes a puzzle that investigators struggle to solve. Ruslana's belongings are arranged with unusual precision. Photographs placed in specific configurations, personal mementos organized in ways that suggest deliberate intent rather than random placement. Her laptop reveals the troubling blog entries and extensive research into spiritual practices, but also evidence of future planning. Scheduled appointments, travel bookings, communications with family members that suggest someone making plans rather than preparing to die. The interviews with friends and colleagues reveal a complex picture of someone who was struggling but not necessarily suicidal. Maria Santos, a fellow model who worked with Ruslana on several campaigns, describes their last conversation as concerning but not alarming. "She seemed tired, you know. Like she was carrying something heavy, but she was talking about going home to Kazakhstan for a visit, about maybe taking a break from modeling to study languages again." These aren't the words of someone planning to kill herself, but other witnesses tell different stories. James Morrison, a photographer who worked with Ruslana frequently, noticed dramatic changes in her behavior during their final sessions together. "She used to be so present when she worked," he recalls. "She could become whatever character the camera needed, but in those last few months it was like she was performing the performance, you know? Like she was watching herself from outside her body. It was unsettling." The Rose of the World connection becomes the most controversial aspect of the investigation, generating theories that range from psychological manipulation to outright criminal conspiracy. The organization, led by a charismatic figure named Dr. Mikhail Volkov, operates in the gray area between legitimate spiritual counseling and potentially dangerous psychological manipulation. Former members describe intensive sessions designed to break down false consciousness and release attachment to earthly identity, processes that sound like therapy but might actually be forms of psychological abuse. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, a cult specialist consulted by investigators, raises serious concerns about the group's methods and their potential impact on vulnerable individuals like Ruslana. "What they call spiritual awakening looks a lot like deliberate psychological destabilization," she explains. "They take people who are already struggling with identity issues and convince them that their problems stem from attachment to false concepts of self. For someone whose entire career depends on maintaining a carefully constructed image, that kind of teaching can be devastating." The financial investigation reveals complexities that add another layer to the mystery. Despite her apparent success, Ruslana's finances were under significant strain at the time of her death. The modeling industry's feast or famine nature meant that her income fluctuated dramatically based on bookings and seasonal demand. The expensive lifestyle required to maintain her image, the Manhattan apartment, designer clothes, professional grooming, constant travel, consumed enormous amounts of money that left little room for financial security. More troubling are the financial connections to Rose of the World, which received substantial payments from Ruslana in the months leading up to her death. Bank records show transfers totaling nearly $75,000 to the organization, amounts that represent a significant portion of her savings. The payments suggest either extraordinary dedication to the group's programs or possible financial exploitation of someone in psychological crisis. The media coverage that follows the investigation creates its own kind of circus, transforming Ruslana's death into entertainment for audiences hungry for celebrity tragedy. Tabloid newspapers publish sensational headlines speculating about everything from romantic entanglements with mysterious wealthy men to involvement in international trafficking rings. The same publications that once celebrated her beauty now profit from her death, creating narratives that have little connection to the actual evidence but satisfy public appetite for dramatic explanations. The conspiracy theories that emerge reflect the fashion world's tendency toward paranoia and the public's difficulty accepting that beautiful, successful people can be genuinely unhappy. Some focus on the Rose of the World connection, suggesting that the organization deliberately drove vulnerable members to suicide as part of some larger scheme. Others point to possible romantic relationships with powerful men whose identities were kept secret, implying that Ruslana may have been killed to prevent damaging revelations. The most persistent theory involves what investigators call the missing hours, a gap in the timeline of Ruslana's final day that cannot be fully accounted for. Security cameras in her building show her entering the elevator alone at approximately 1:15 p.m., but the timestamp on her final blog entry suggests it was posted nearly an hour after her estimated time of death. The discrepancy creates space for theories about everything from delayed posting software to the presence of other people in her apartment. But perhaps the most haunting theory is the simplest one: that Ruslana Korshunova died because she could no longer bear the gap between who she was and who the world wanted her to be. The girl from Kazakhstan who dreamed of becoming a translator found herself translated into so many different versions: Rapunzel, fairy tale princess, fashion icon, spiritual seeker, that she lost track of the original text. The official ruling of suicide provides legal closure but fails to explain why someone at the height of her career, with no apparent financial problems and no history of mental illness, would choose to end her life so suddenly and dramatically. The determination feels both definitive and completely inadequate, satisfying the bureaucratic need for classification while leaving all the important questions unanswered. The alternative explanations offered by family and friends feel equally unsatisfying in their own ways. The accident theory requires believing that someone as careful and deliberate as Ruslana would somehow fall from a window that required significant effort to open fully. The murder theory demands accepting that powerful forces would orchestrate such an elaborate scheme to silence someone whose secrets, whatever they were never revealed or even clearly defined. The case officially closes 6 months after Ruslana's death, but the questions it raises about the fashion industry, spiritual manipulation, and the psychological costs of fame continue to resonate. The young woman whose beauty made her famous becomes, in death, a symbol of everything dangerous about the pursuit of perfection, everything costly about the commodification of human beings, everything tragic about dreams that come true in ways their dreamers never anticipated. June 28, 2008. The world stops to absorb the news that Ruslana Korshunova has died at age 20, officially joining the tragic sisterhood of beautiful women who died too young under circumstances that remain forever mysterious. Gia Karanji, Edie Sedgwick, and now Ruslana, faces that graced magazine covers and haunted public imagination. Women whose beauty became both their salvation and their destruction. The immediate response to Ruslana's death reveals the complex relationship between public and private grief in celebrity culture. The fashion industry, which profited from her beauty and contributed to the pressures that may have killed her, responds with tributes that feel both genuine and self-serving. Designers who worked with her speak of her professionalism and natural grace, while photographers share stories of her unique ability to embody their artistic visions. But the most telling responses come from other models who recognize in Ruslana's story elements of their own struggles with identity, authenticity, and the psychological costs of commodifying beauty. Her death becomes a mirror in which the entire industry must confront uncomfortable truths about the way it treats young women, the pressures it creates, and the support systems it fails to provide. The conspiracy theories begin almost immediately, fueled by the fashion world's natural tendency toward dramatic interpretation and the genuine mysteries surrounding Ruslana's final weeks. The Rose of the World connection generates speculation about spiritual manipulation and psychological abuse. The lack of a suicide note creates space for theories about accident or even murder. The beautiful young woman's death becomes a Rorschach test onto which people project their own fears about fame, beauty, and the dark side of dreams come true. Was her death as straightforward as reported, or were powerful hidden forces involved? The official investigation concludes that Ruslana killed herself, but the conclusion feels incomplete to anyone who knew her personally. The girl who wrote about feeling lost and caged had also written about hope, about finding love, about the possibility of transformation that would free rather than destroy her authentic self. The mystery deepens rather than resolves as more details emerge about her final weeks. Friends report conversations that suggest someone exploring dramatic life changes rather than contemplating death. Family members describe phone calls that revealed homesickness and uncertainty but not despair. The accumulated evidence points towards someone in crisis, but not necessarily someone planning suicide. The media coverage that follows her death oscillates between respectful remembrance and exploitative sensationalism. The same magazines that featured her on their covers now publish retrospectives that attempt to find signs of tragedy in photographs that were meant to celebrate beauty. The images take on new meaning in light of her death. The ethereal quality that once seemed magical now appears ghostly. The otherworldly beauty that made her famous now suggests someone who was never quite of this world. The establishment of the Ruslana Korshunova Foundation by her family represents an attempt to transform personal tragedy into meaningful social change. The organization focuses on supporting young models' mental health and providing resources for those struggling with the psychological pressures of the fashion industry. But even this well-intentioned effort raises questions about whether the industry can reform itself or whether the fundamental contradictions that killed Ruslana are inherent to the business of selling beauty. The fashion industry's response to her death reveals both its capacity for self-reflection and its resistance to meaningful change. Some agencies implement new policies designed to protect young models' psychological well-being. Mandatory counseling services, limits on working hours for models under 21, protocols for identifying signs of psychological distress. Others continue operating according to the same principles that prioritize appearance over mental health, commercial success over human welfare. The Model Alliance, an advocacy group formed partly in response to tragedies like Ruslana's, publishes a comprehensive report on the psychological pressures facing young models in the international fashion industry. The document reveals systemic problems that extend far beyond individual cases. Widespread use of underage models, financial exploitation, sexual harassment, and psychological abuse disguised as artistic direction. Ruslana's story becomes part of a larger narrative about an industry that consumes young women with the same ruthless efficiency that it produces beautiful images. Sarah Ziff, a former model-turned-activist who leads the Model Alliance, speaks directly about the connection between Ruslana's death and broader industry practices. The fashion world creates these impossible standards of perfection, and then acts surprised when young women break under the pressure, she explains. Ruslana was just one of many girls who got caught in a system that values appearance over humanity. profit over people's lives. The international scope of the modeling industry complicates efforts at reform, as models like Ruslana often work across multiple countries with different labor laws and cultural standards. A girl discovered in Kazakhstan, developed in Moscow, and marketed in New York exists in a legal and cultural limbo where no single authority takes responsibility for her welfare. The lack of consistent oversight creates opportunities for exploitation that would be impossible in more regulated industries. 10 years after her death, Ruslana's influence on fashion and popular culture remains complex and contradictory. Her photographs continue to inspire designers and photographers who see in her face an ideal of romantic beauty that transcends temporary trends. The pre-Raphaelite aesthetic that made her famous has experienced multiple revivals, with new models often compared to the next Ruslana, based on their ability to embody similar ethereal qualities. But her story also serves as a cautionary tale that has genuinely changed some aspects of how the industry operates. Major modeling agencies now require psychological evaluations for models under 18. Fashion weeks have implemented minimum age requirements for runway shows, and several high-profile photographers have spoken publicly about their responsibility to protect the mental health of the young women they work with. The Ruslana Korshunova Foundation, established by her family using proceeds from her estate, has become one of the most important organizations addressing mental health issues in the modeling industry. The foundation provides counseling services, financial support, and advocacy for models struggling with the psychological pressures of their careers. More importantly, it has created a space where models can speak honestly about their experiences without fear of professional retaliation. Valentina Korshunova, Ruslana's mother, has become an unlikely advocate for industry reform, despite her limited English and complete lack of experience in fashion or entertainment. Her annual speeches at the foundation's fundraising events provide some of the most powerful testimony about the human costs of beauty commodification. "My daughter was not just a pretty face," she says through a translator during one particularly moving presentation. "She was a brilliant girl who spoke 3 languages, who loved poetry, who dreamed of building bridges between cultures. But the world only wanted to see her beauty, and she died trying to be more than beautiful." The foundation's most significant achievement has been the establishment of the Ruslana Protocol, a set of industry guidelines designed to protect young models' psychological and physical health. The protocol requires agencies to provide counseling resources, limits the use of models under 16 in adult-oriented campaigns, and creates reporting mechanisms for models who experience abuse or exploitation. While adoption of the protocol remains voluntary, several major agencies and fashion weeks have implemented its recommendations. The question that haunts Ruslana's legacy is whether her death was preventable or inevitable. Could better support systems, more responsible management, or greater awareness of the psychological pressures facing young models have saved her? The evidence suggests that multiple intervention points existed where different choices might have led to different outcomes. If Rose of the World had been investigated sooner, if the modeling industry had better mental health resources, if her agents had recognized the signs of psychological distress. But the systemic nature of the problems that killed Ruslana suggests that individual interventions might not have been sufficient. The fashion industry's fundamental business model depends on finding young, beautiful women and transforming them into commodities for global consumption. The psychological pressures that destroyed Ruslana are inherent to this process, not accidental byproducts that can be easily eliminated through policy changes. The mystery of what really happened in those final moments will likely never be solved definitively. The physical evidence supports multiple interpretations. The psychological evidence points in different directions, and the people who might have provided answers took their secrets with them to the grave. Ruslana Korshunova becomes not just a fashion icon, but a symbol of the unresolved tensions between appearance and reality, between public success and private suffering. The conspiracy theories continue to evolve and multiply as new information emerges and old evidence is reinterpreted. Online communities dedicated to solving the Ruslana mystery have generated thousands of pages of analysis, speculation, and investigation. Some focus on the Rose of the World connection, others on possible romantic relationships, still others on financial irregularities or industry connections. The theories become increasingly elaborate and unlikely, but they persist because the official explanation feels inadequate to explain such a dramatic and unexpected death. The most recent development in the case came in 10 years after Ruslana's death, when former Rose of the World member Jennifer Walsh published a memoir detailing her experiences with the organization. Walsh's account describes psychological manipulation techniques that closely match the kinds of destabilization that Ruslana experienced in her final months. The book reignites interest in the cult theory and leads to renewed calls for official investigation of the group's practices. But even Walsh's revelations, disturbing as they are, failed to provide definitive answers about Ruslana's death. The connection between Rose of the World's psychological manipulation and her fatal fall remains circumstantial, suggestive rather than conclusive. The organization's leaders continue to deny any responsibility for her death, claiming that their programs are designed to help rather than harm participants. In the end, Ruslana represents something both beautiful and terrible about the promise of transformation through beauty. Her story suggests that anyone can become anything they want to be, but it also warns that some transformations require sacrificing everything that makes transformation worthwhile. The girl from Kazakhstan who dreamed of bridging different worlds through language became a bridge herself, between reality and fantasy, between mortality and immortality, between the known and the unknowable. The little girl who was once called Rapunzel of Almaty found her tower in a Manhattan high-rise, but unlike the fairy tale that inspired her nickname, there was no prince to catch her when she fell. Instead, she became part of New York's mythology, another beautiful ghost haunting the city's endless appetite for dreams that shine brightly and burn out quickly. Somewhere tonight, someone discovers Ruslana Korshunova's photographs for the first time. Perhaps in a vintage magazine, perhaps in an online retrospective, perhaps in a documentary about fashion's dark side. And in that moment of discovery, the mystery deepens rather than resolves. Was she a bird in a golden cage who finally found a way to flee, or was she pushed from her perch by forces too powerful to resist? The question echoes through the silence of her empty apartment, through the images that captured her beauty but not her pain, through the gap between who she was and who the world needed her to be. The show, as it always does in fashion, goes on, but somewhere in the shadows cast by runway lights, Ruslana's story continues to whisper its warning, that beauty can be both blessing and curse, that transformation can mean both salvation and destruction, and that sometimes the most dangerous cages are the ones lined with gold.